on this episode of The Keto Woman.
Women usually need to use body fat to maintain their body temperature and then maintain their metabolism. So fat is actually important for women. However, people are trying to lose just body weight instead of body fat.
There are so many people at risk, and that's metabolic syndrome is basically your yellow light before you get to the red light. Like, hey, something is going on with the body. We need to catch it now, and we can address it through lifestyle. But most people don't even know they're at the yellow light. Your breakfast, lunch, and dinner can actually be medicine. Your approach to a buffet line, that is medicine, or it can hurt you.
But I have a thing about the word fine. I think it's a 4-letter word. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, today I want to feel fine. But we've been bought into a bill of goods that says this is as good as it's going to get. Actually, you can look, feel, and function fabulously in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, and even longer.
From leading nutritional expert Naomi Whittle comes a new docuseries created for women by women, a series that will heal your body and mind with expert information and success stories. With New York Times best-selling author Naomi Whittle and registered dietitian Marianne Walsh. This is The Keto Woman.
Welcome to The Keto Woman. I'm Naomi Whittle. For those of you who may not know me, I'm a mother of 4, a New York Times bestselling author, and a wellness explorer. I get to travel all over the world. I discover some of the most potent nutritional ingredients, the latest research, and science to enhance our health and well-being. And while I've spent more than 2 decades of my career in health and wellness, so much of what I do stems from my own personal health challenges. I'm going to share more of my personal story later. The journey we're about to embark on together is about all of the women I am so fortunate to know and have in my life. These women are just like you. They're wives, they're mothers, they're daughters, they're scientists, businesswomen, friends, and so much more. As women, our collective strength, our perseverance, our passion for life, it can truly move mountains. We work hard to never fail anyone we love. Over time, our hectic schedules, stress, inadequate diet, the lack of sleep, they truly take their toll and do damage to our bodies. As a result, more than 100 million people in the US alone are suffering from the devastating effects of a declining metabolic health. Our metabolic health impacts every single part of our lives and our well-being, including whether or not we are at risk for chronic diseases, things like obesity, heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, as well as impacting other areas of our health, like our weight, our energy levels, hormones, and aging. To help guide us through the overwhelming amount of information, I am incredibly fortunate to have registered dietitian, nutritional expert, Marianne Walsh. She is here with me. Together, we're going to share the latest research, and we're going to give you the tools that will allow you to easily and quickly optimize your own metabolic health. Marianne, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Naomi. And you're exactly right. I have worked with so many women who have struggled to lose or maintain their weight. They've struggled from depleted energy levels, experienced hormone imbalance, and they've seen the signs of accelerated aging. But what's most troubling is that about 85% of adults are considered to be at a metabolic disadvantage, which means they may be experiencing one or more of the following: high blood pressure, high blood sugar, high levels of abdominal fat, a high triglyceride level, or a low HDL cholesterol level. This is the underlying cause of so many of our health issues today. It's true that metabolic health is affected by some things that you can't change, like age and genetics, but the fact is that much of it is controllable through lifestyle decisions that we make every day. The concept of metabolism can be really confusing, and many women refer to theirs as either being fast or slow. But we both know that there is so much more to it than that.
That is so true, Marianne. Just by learning about our metabolism and the simple changes that we can make that can optimize our overall metabolic health, we have the power to transform our overall health and our well-being. And that is exactly what Marianne and I are going to do and share with you throughout this series. Together, through our expert interviews, we're going to gain a better understanding of our metabolism and explain the optimal fuel for each and every one of our bodies. We're going to understand the biology of body composition, one of my favorite subjects, the concept of skinny fat, and why you should toss out that scale.
The information we are about to share will be life-changing, and you'll also hear from women just like you who transform their health, their bodies, and their lives. I am so excited to be with you on this journey and to share this critical information through our experts and the personal experiences of women in our keto community. In part 1 of this series, we are going to explore the engine of energy, aka our metabolism.
Thank you so much for joining me. I'm thrilled to have you here. Can you tell me your name and your background?
My name is Dr. Tami Meraglia, and it's not my fault I married an Italian.
That's a good thing.
It is. And I'm an MD, and I practice naturopathic functional medicine and stem cell medicine.
Incredible. How long have you been practicing medicine?
Oh my goodness. Well, I've had my own clinic for about 10 years, and prior to that, I was the medical director at several other clinics so that I could learn what not to do.
I hear that all the time, and I'm so fascinated to look at you. You look like you just got out of medical school.
Oh, no.
and clearly you're working with some of the top celebrities and the top people in the world that can work with anyone, right? They can work with anyone.
I am very blessed, yes. And also just the majority of my patients are just regular people who are struggling to figure out how to not feel fine, but to feel fabulous. We were mentioning earlier that I have a thing about the word fine. I think it's a 4-letter word.
Okay, so wait a minute here. The word fine, which look, I feel fine. Why is it a 4-letter word?
Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, today I want to feel fine. And it really came from when I was in residency and seeing patients in my clinic, and they would come, mostly women, and they would say, I just don't feel myself. I've got some weight that I can't lose, even though I'm eating less and exercising more. I don't have the energy or the spontaneity. I don't laugh. I just don't feel myself. And I would run the usual tests that an MD ran, the blood work. And when they came back, I would tell them they were fine. And they'd say, but I don't feel fine. And that's when I realized fine is a 4-letter word, and nobody really wants to feel fine. They want to feel fabulous. And with regard to lab testing, fine just means that you're aging at the average American in the middle of the country. That's not my aspiration.
No, not at all. And it seems that with all of the environmental challenges that we go through, the chronic stress that so many of us are under, that fine may be different today than it was 40 years ago or 20 years ago even.
Oh, absolutely. From our food not having as much, it's not as nutrient dense as it used to be, and our 24/7 lifestyle, and caring for parents and children, where generations ago the parents were the ones that were able to help with the children. There's a lot going on.
We get so sandwiched, right, between the children and the parents, and so fine becomes something different, which I really respect and appreciate what you're saying. How do we, with the crazy lives that we're living, based on your incredible education and background and experience, how do we shift from that fine to getting into a fabulous place?
I think it starts with hope. That's what you're doing here, is you're allowing people to look through the curtain, behind the curtain, under the curtain, however way you want to get there, doesn't matter. But we've been bought into a bill of goods that says this is as good as it's going to get. and to inspire people and show them a glimpse of hope that actually you can look, feel, and function fabulously in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, and even longer.
You were a ballerina.
I was for many years.
Tell me about what you ate and what your life was like as a ballerina.
That was in the fat-free phase where, we were not eating any fat, not just in the ballet company, but the whole country was on this fat-free frenzy. And we got fat, didn't we? Not eating fat created this obesity because what we were eating was sugar. But my lunch was a diet tab, yes, I'm that old, and an apple. And it doesn't result in any good energy. We would eat honey before performances to get a little sugar boost.
Right. And I bet everyone thought that was so healthy and the right thing to do, right?
Fat-free was fantastic. Fat-free yogurt, fat-free dressings on your salad, and, heaven forbid should you actually eat fat, like an avocado or anything like that. Never.
Wow. And so that's when you were a ballerina. And what do you think in today's climate? I mean, your patients, what are they asking you for, and what are the challenges that you see in front of all of us?
It's a little bit interesting because I still have the privilege of seeing patients every day. I really feel like I have the opportunity to literally affect how and when people could die. And I really take that seriously. And it surprises me that still today we have people who are afraid of eating fat. Still.
I think it almost seems as though it's the majority of the population in this country that still worries about that. You talk about the liver needing a rest, and I've had so much inflammation in my life from the eczema that I've struggled with that I learned at a very young age about fasting, and I would rest my system, my digestive system, for a day, a week. Sometimes I would do quarterly, a week-long fast, just different amounts of time and do it in different ways. Talk to us about sort of the overall resting that our cells may need and what your thoughts are.
I think that resting your system is fantastic. If you think about, giving a plant water, if you continue to pour and pour and pour and pour, it's going to overflow, and you can think of the overflow as inflammation, whether it's into your skin or your joints or your bones with osteoporosis. Even cardiovascular disease has inflammation. But if you stop pouring, the plant can catch up. So that's what fasting is for me, is that rest. Let your body catch up. I'm not sure if the literature is sufficient enough to count a delayed breakfast as a true fast, though. I'm not sure if that's just a lazy cheat.
So tell us a little bit more about that.
Every religion and philosophy that you can study has a time of fasting, and it's from sunup to sunup. And I think there's something very powerful about not just the food aspect and your body and the inflammation and allowing that cleaning and resting, but I think that it's also a wonderful time to just process, especially in America, to understand what's the difference between a craving and hunger. Many people overeat because they think they're hungry. They're not hungry.
They're craving.
Yes.
So tell us the difference between the two.
Well, if you can eat, a piece of fish and 2 vegetables and a beautiful salad and want to eat again an hour and a half later, you are not hungry. Your body has had sufficient nutrition to last more than an hour and a half. What you're doing is craving. But it's interesting, the fat is something that helps make us feel satisfied. So that's where it can help, having fatty fish and having some fat in that meal can help us feel satisfied longer.
And so with the lifestyle of no fat, fat is dangerous, all of these thoughts that we've heard for so long in this country specifically, how does that relate to hunger and cravings?
You will not feel satisfied as easily without fat. There's a little center, that satiety center in our brain that is turned on when we eat fat, and especially fats like coconut oil and MCT oil and things like that. It just makes you feel like you're satisfied. And the other hormones, insulin and ghrelin's the bad guy because it sounds like gremlin, they make you feel hungry right away, even though you just ate. But the good fats can say, no, we're good. We're satisfied. So it's a balance of eating enough fat for your brain, for feeling satisfied, for your hormones to be produced, but not too much on a regular basis that your body may or may not be able to handle, so it gets stuck in the liver. And sugar gets us to spike and then crash, and so there's no satisfaction. It's just this big wow and then nothing. And that's why ketogenic diets are actually beneficial, I think. When we have a ketogenic diet, there's some videos about it, and I like to bring it to my patients' attention. That's like a campfire. The lighter fluid, you're trying to get your barbecue going and you've got your coals and everything. The lighter fluid is candy and chocolate and all of the things that give us that quick on. The kindling is the foods like fruit and vegetables that have higher glycemic index, white bread, bagels, things like that. The wood is your meats and your fish and your chicken, but the coals are the fat. And so that's what gives you your long, steady energy, just like your campfire. That long, steady energy to cook a steak. You're not going to cook a steak with kindling.
Oh, that's a really excellent analogy for anyone to think about. So we're looking to use coal to really help us to cook whatever it is that we may want to. But with that coal, there are things that we need to pay attention to that could create challenges, right? Mm-hmm. So the liver, and making sure that the liver is able to rest and cleanse as part of using coal as a burning fuel. What else is there that we need to pay attention to?
Well, if you've got your coals glowing and you're ready to put your steak on or whatever it is that you're going to cook on your barbecue with the coals, what happens if you put kindling or paper on it? Do the coals say, no, I'm good, I'm not going to get you to catch fire and take over? Absolutely not. The kindling goes up. And so as soon as you shift into eating carbs, you're out of ketosis. Mm-hmm. And so I think that people have to remember that burning ketones for fuel, those coals, can be done in a number of ways. And one of them is to avoid those kindling and lighting fluid, which is the breads and the gluten and the starches and the high glycemic fruits and things like that, the carbs. And the other is fasting. Mm-hmm. The other is fasting. When you have no food, your brain is dependent on glucose, and the thing that it will do to save you from death is to start to burn ketones. That's why people feel energetic. I mean, when you did a week-long fast, were you exhausted and laying down and couldn't get out of bed, or did you find a time where
I think at the beginning,
came?
it takes a bit of time, just like you were saying with the liver cleanse. It takes a little bit of time to get into a place where you have energy, but as soon as I have energy, then it's off the charts. Then I have more energy than I have at any other time.
Yes, those are ketones.
Like this energy source.
Yeah.
There are different types of fats that have different effects on our body. Mm-hmm. Tell us about the MCT oil, coconut oil. What's the big deal?
People don't realize that there are many ways to classify fat, and previously we just had, monosaturated, polyunsaturated, all of those types. Then we have long-chain fatty acids and short-chain fatty acids, and now we have medium-chain fatty acids, which is the MCT oil. Then we have smoke points about our oils, and should you use this for cooking or not because of the smoke point. So it gets really overwhelming, which is probably why you're doing this documentary to help.
It does get very overwhelming.
Yes, yes. So the ones that are the best for your brain, for energy, which means your body can just let go of the rest of your fat that is storing toxins and not blessing your life, are the ones that are going to be burned slower, which is the coconut oil and the MCT oils.
That's fascinating. And so you're incorporating these interesting and healthy fats so that you've got your coals burning, and you have to be aware of the enzymes and your liver's health. What else would you share with us about fat and consuming different fats and these high sugar diets, like women and hormones and how that all sort of interrelates? Because as a woman, and knowing so many other women that hear, okay, you should eat a high-fat diet or you should fast, and then we've got such a different play with our hormones.
Yeah, we really do. And I think women are trying to piggyback on all of the fads that are really much better for men, like the ketogenic diet is great for men. And
but
some
why
women,
is that?
Because
why
we're
is
not
that?
the same. We really are not the same. There's great clinical trials about statin drugs, and statin drugs actually have been shown to have zero benefit for women. Zero.
Wow.
And it increases your risk of diabetes and dementia. So there are clinical trials that are done on women, but they're few and far between. So we have to remember we're not the same. I wrote a book called The Hormone Secret, and there's a section on two things. One is the fat, and the first thing I do when I have women who are trying to lose weight and their hormones are just gone, they're nowhere to be found, especially testosterone, which gives you your energy and your muscle to fat ratio, I get them to eat more fat.
Interesting.
But there's another thing that I actually was many years ago when I got into hormones, and why was I not feeling my best in residency, was I was skinny fat.
Okay, I've heard this skinny fat before, and I'd love to have how you explain it. What is the definition?
If you weigh the same as you weighed previously, but your muscle to fat ratio is significantly different, then you are more fat than muscle. So I don't weigh a lot, but I was mostly fat. And so I was a skinny fat person, and skinny fat people have even more health risks due to their fat than some of the obese people.
Why would that be? Why would a skinny fat person have actually more risk? That's really interesting.
You know, there's not a lot of great studies. I personally think it's because you don't have a lot of motivation to change it.
Because you're thin.
Right.
You're skinny.
Fit into your jeans. Sure, there's a little fold over them that never used to be there, but you can button it up and everything's squishy, but in clothes, there's no motivation.
And what is someone who's skinny fat? What is their hormonal profile
They don't have
looking
any
like?
hormones, no testosterone, very little to no progesterone, and then often they're estrogen dominant, which is making more fat. You know, we used to think of fat as just cushion and insulation, but it's very active. You know, fat is actually one of my best friends as a stem cell surgeon. I take out people's fat all day, every day, to get to the stem cells that live in there. It also can turn your testosterone into estrogen. If you're a man, that's terrible because it has enzyme activity. It affects your hormones. It's very, very active. So we want to respect our fat and not give our body sugar, which is what's making the fat. Eating fat does not make you fat.
Eating fat does not make us fat.
Right.
When you were talking a little bit about fasting or intermittent fasting and the book that you wrote, The Hormone Secret, certainly for men and for women there's a difference. you talk about the difference in fasting for a man versus a woman?
Well, I think also men just have a lot bigger frame, and so they can fast more easily longer because they have more to go on for a longer period of time. I also think that it's a lot psychological. Women can fast, but I think that they're affected and they're in tune with their bodies, so they feel that drop in blood glucose when your body is shifting from a sugar source of energy to a ketone source of energy when you're fasting.
So you're feeling that shift more or less and going through those changes. But do you also find that for women, the cravings that occur when we're in this sugar-dominant lifestyle is more of an issue and is driving us versus the challenges with fasting? I'm very curious about your thoughts there.
Yeah, it's just fasting for women is a psychological journey, just as much as a physical one, and that's much less for men. And it's because of the cravings and the thoughts of food and just that journey with why am I thinking about the cake?
Right.
Like, it's bedtime. I don't need cake right now.
What's going on there?
We are going to just, I hope we have a lot of time because this could go on and on and on. I think it has a lot to do with our microbiome. So there are more bugs in our gut than we have cells in our body. And when we feed our body sugar and foods that turn to sugar, we alter the microbiome. And so the bugs that are there are the bugs that survive on processed foods and sugar and foods that turn to sugar. 2/3 of our brain neurotransmitters are created in our gut by these microbiome bacteria. So when you don't feed them, they literally create the neurotransmitters to tell you to eat the things that will help them survive.
Wow.
I know. And guess who's behind all of this?
I have no idea.
Our big food companies. Yeah. It's so, so sad because if you stuck with foods that you could kill, pick, grow, you would be fine. Well, not fine, fabulous.
So we're laying in bed at night and we're thinking about that piece of chocolate cake that's sitting in the fridge because
of the
bugs
microbiome
in our gut, our microbiome has sent all of those neurotransmitters to tell us that's where we need to focus.
Yep.
And as a woman, I can completely and totally relate to that.
Yeah.
And are you saying that men don't have those same cravings? I don't notice it so much with my husband as I do with myself.
So we're designed to have the reward center in our brain stimulated. It makes us feel alive. It makes us want to live. And the problem, or rather the solution, is food, especially the food that turns to sugar or is sugar. And I think that men stimulate, or generally speaking, that reward center in other ways. They work out. They're part of a village more than women. Women are working harder than ever, and they have less support than ever. Go to a football stadium. How many of the guys have gone out together to be there? Where are the girls?
Right.
What are they doing?
Yeah.
So we're designed for this, and I hope that women have grace upon themselves to realize that they're being manipulated by this microbiome. But you made a comment when we were just talking that women crave food more than anything else, and I would agree. I think that they crave food more than sex, they crave food more than friendship, they crave food more than sleep. They'll wake up to eat and go to the fridge. And it's this combination of not feeling satisfied, the microbiome being completely dysfunctional and unbalanced, and then our reward center. And food works so well to hit that reward center and to stimulate and make you feel instantaneously better.
So as a ballerina, you probably white-knuckled for
yeah.
extended periods of time.
Yes, but I had a lot of motivation. We were weighed.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of pressure. It's not like that anymore.
And what was the range? Like, what was acceptable?
Thinner was better.
Thinner and thinner and thinner?
Yeah. That was in the 80s.
Yeah. So how did you deal with that? And do you feel that you negatively impacted your health? Did it take time to strengthen yourself afterward?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, your health, so much is made from good fat, like we were saying, your brain and your hormones and things like that. But also I think that, for a woman, it's hard to be judged and have your value based on the number on the scale. And it is no different right now. There are 12 and 13-year-old girls who still feel like they need to be blonde, blue-eyed, and skinny. And it's so sad.
Yeah. So as a mother of 2 and a woman who was at a place where you were being weighed, and that number was your value, right? If you were going to continue or not continue as a ballerina, and you were eating a scoop of honey to perform, so I'm sure your blood sugar was like this.
Yeah.
To go from there to saying fat does not make you fat, that's such an incredible difference between the two. And I'm just so curious to understand that difference, and how do you know that fat doesn't make us fat? And there's such a transformation.
There are mountains of research proving it. Just incredible amounts of research.
So when you stopped being a ballerina and you went into your medical profession and became an incredible medical doctor to some of the most beautiful and unbelievable individuals across the world, across the globe, when you did that, do you look back and are you angry at the diet tab and the honey and all of the things that you used to sort of spike you up and down while you were in that world of the scale?
Not at all.
No.
For 2 reasons. One is I am who I am because of how I got here. But we didn't know back then. That's
Right.
like saying to somebody, 60 years ago that, you should have known you shouldn't smoke. Well, the doctors were handing it out.
Right.
The military would give it to you in your rations. That wasn't common knowledge. But today, the kids today, they need to make better choices because there's a plethora of information and support.
And it's not even, for me, it's not even about the choices that we make. It's just what is in our world, right?
Right.
It wasn't that you were making a choice. You were doing the very best that you were going to do at that time.
And that
of
everybody
course.
was doing.
Everybody.
Yeah.
So it was more, the question I was wondering about was, were you angry at big food companies or the information that was out there as you learned?
I think I am now.
Yeah.
Not then. So I don't think people would consider me an angry person, and when I am angry, pretty often you don't know it except for if you're listening to my words. But I think that comes with medical training. You can learn it's an emergency, you need how to keep it together. But that doesn't mean we can't feel angry. And I think one of the things that I felt the most angry was when my children were asking for hot lunch. And they were begging, "Mommy, can I have hot lunch?" And boy, did I want to have hot lunch. I wouldn't have to make lunches. Oh, did I want hot lunch. And I looked at it, and it was corn dogs and Oreo cookies and mac and cheese. And I thought, this is the 21st century. This is I think it was 2015 at the time. And so I responded to my children. I said, you can have hot lunch when they have real food. But I was mad that we know so much, and yet we're still doing this. We're still feeding junk to our kids. We still have 3/4 of the grocery store full of things that shouldn't even be called food, that feed the bugs in your gut, that tell you to eat more junk. And instead of getting discouraged, I choose to fight and educate and hopefully inspire.
Thank you so much. That is a true inspiration to hear from you, and your time and your expertise is so valuable to all of us. I really can't thank you enough.
Well, what a wonderful project you have here. I'm sure it's going to bless many, many lives.
Thank you. Dr. Kathy Saenz, I have been waiting to share your message, your research, your understanding around keto and being a woman since the very first time I spoke with you on the phone and I got to meet you. I'm so inspired by how you truly are impacting so many people around the globe with your insights around keto, the research that you've done, and so much more. And will you tell us a little bit about your background in exercise physiology as well as nutrition?
Yes. And thank you so much for having me here, because it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure and truly an honor to get to share this knowledge with people, because the biggest thing that I've learned and continue to learn is that everyone wants it. You just don't know where to go. So if I can help be that mediator, learn myself and help translate that, that's amazing. And that really carries into the background that has brought us together. And I have always been interested in exercise. Exercise is my first love. I really didn't get into nutrition until much later, but didn't realize how much I was involved in nutrition. So I come from a very active family, but also come from a family where my mom really took nutrition as a creative and interesting and also a healing purpose in our lives. So I had an autoimmune disorder growing up, but I wasn't diagnosed till much later.
Wait, tell us a little bit more. What was your autoimmune disorder?
Later diagnosed as celiac. Okay. At the time, I was diagnosed with all sorts of things ever since I was a baby, and it would exhibit itself in really unusual ways. So I would react to bug bites, or I would get extra sick around seasonal changes or travel changes, or foods would really disrupt my system, and it would affect my skin, it would affect my iron levels, it would affect energy, mood, everything. But these were things that were noticed since I was a baby, and nobody knew what it was. And so my mom basically had to play trial and error, because you have a baby that I couldn't drink milk, I couldn't take a lot of other nutrients when I was growing up, so they had to figure it out. So my mom played around with nutrition so much. I bring that up because I see how it affects me now, but I really didn't clue into how much that had affected me when I was going through school. Throughout that process, I played around a lot with my nutrition, but also I was always so active, and that's what led me into exercise physiology. I would see that these incredible changes could happen, or you could really push the body in these unbelievable ways, and I loved that, and I still do. So that's what started my education at the University of Maryland. And the big ticket there, which I thought I wanted to go clinical, but I just couldn't get away from sports, is that I love that you could have an entire team that was exactly the same, but some would take different supplements, some would move differently, some just had these tiny changes that they themselves did, and their performance would be different. So that's what led me to graduate school at the University of Connecticut, and it was really molding how we could use ergogenic aids for exercise physiology. So I was on a totally different path than
so
what I do
define
now.
these aids, the nutritional supplements, these small little switches, and
it would be things like, and I was so green behind the ears at the time, so the importance of hydration and the importance of recovery nutrients around exercise, most commonly creatine or protein powder of some sort. But I took that as, oh my gosh, like if we pay attention to this supplement, your whole world's gonna change. And it was in graduate school that I really learned that why stop at a supplement when you could do the whole diet. You know, you could look at your entire diet to change your life. And that I bring all the credit to my lab at the time, the lab that I was involved with, Dr. Jeff Volek, and all the professors that I had in that environment. And I've also had amazing professors before that have gotten me to that point. But that's where I learned, oh, your breakfast, lunch, and dinner can actually be medicine. I mean, your approach to your approach to a buffet line, that is medicine, or it can hurt you. And so that concept, even though it sounds so simple or so silly, just, it carries me each day, that we have medicine at our fingertips through each of our meals and through each form of exercise. And it can be good or it can be bad. And the science of learning about that, and that's what's brought me now to my current position at Jacksonville University, getting to explore it with folks and this amazing team that we've been able to keep building to learn how nutrition and exercise can affect the whole body and the whole system.
I love what you just said, and actually it almost brought tears to my eyes. This empowering concept that food is our medicine and that we really have the control. If we can understand the impact of these foods, and if we want to add in these nutrients, these supplements, we have the ability to heal our own bodies, to perform where we have more energy and vitality, and really enjoy our lives to a potential that so many people really don't get to with the amount of obesity and health issues that we have in this country. Talk to me a little bit about how you sort of view the situation that we're in, not just in this country, but also in other countries. I know you work with a lot of people that, you know, in the world of athletics that are international. So tell us a little bit about it.
Yes, and I'm so happy that we get to diverge into this path, because I actually have started to look at it a lot more just in the past few weeks through a global perspective. So this global health, because it really is worldwide, but there has been centuries and centuries and centuries of where we haven't used food as thy medicine, where we've really used it as a casual part of the day, and it seems to be getting worse and worse, and it coincides with metabolic health, which metabolic health meaning the way your hormones in your body are able to react to the external stimulus for energy, how that impacts every part of your body. So we're seeing obesity go up, and then obesity-driven disorders. So that's things like cardiovascular disease, that is atherosclerosis, that is even in some cases cancer, it's Alzheimer's, it can be dementia. I mean, it is the top 7 causes of death at the moment, and not just 7 causes of death, because that's a number that we don't understand because it's so grandiose, but that's what affects our neighbors. You know, that I feel like cancer is everywhere, heart disease is everywhere. That affects family members and your coworkers, and that has a lifestyle component. And the lifestyle portion that really drives it is, yes, physical activity, but so much of it is nutrition, and we don't get a chance to talk about it as much, or at all. We do it reactively, but not necessarily proactively to even avoid getting there. And recently, heart disease and mental disorders are growing at such an exponential rate in women specifically, and we're looking at what are we providing for women? Like, what are we giving our women? What information, what resources, what time to work through the challenges that already come with life? And heart disease is the #1 killer,
Right.
in women.
And then you look at metabolic syndrome, which we've been doing a lot of work on, and how that's on such a rise right now as well.
Oh, it's exponential. And the scary thing, so absolutely right, I went straight to all the diseases, but all of the symptoms and pre-factors that get us to those diseases, the scary aspect about it is I think we tie them so close to obesity. And yes, there is a weight component, but not always. And so there are so many people at risk, and that's metabolic syndrome is basically your yellow light before you get to the red light.
I get really excited about something you shared with me a while back, which is that there are certain organs in our body that prefer fat, and that fat is their #1 source of fuel. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yes, yeah, not enough people know this, but the 4 most metabolically active organs are the liver, the kidneys, the heart, and the brain. And of those 4, the brain is the only one that really relies more heavily on glucose. all the other ones rely primarily on fat. So it's their preferred energy source and also their primary energy source. So that's what they're using.
And that sounds like such a contradiction, like to think that our heart prefers fat as its fuel and that it's also its primary source of fuel. So when someone is carb-centric, when they're primarily eating carbohydrates, how does that affect the heart? And can you just sort of compare the keto nutritional ketosis to carb-centric?
Yes, so the organs themselves, even in someone who has a higher carbohydrate intake, are still going to turn to fat for fuel. I mean, that's what they use. So they're still turning to fat for fuel. The challenge becomes if those carbohydrates are too high in the system, the other aspects of energy metabolism. So this is now where circulatory system comes in, just slightly different than the fuel of the heart.
Right.
So circulatory system and your inflammatory markers and your hormone markers are now also, they're basically out of whack because the intake we're taking is outside the norm that we should be taking. So in someone who's taking a high level of carbohydrate, our insulin levels are super high and our glucose starts to get erratic. And because glucose is now too high in circulation, it doesn't know where to go. And so it basically stops traffic. Someone who's healthy without any metabolic issues, you're consuming a meal and it could be a mixed nutrient meal. So that means you have a carb and you have a fat and you have a protein. So let's say it's chicken with a salad and a baked potato. So we consume all of that. The nutrients that we're going to use immediately, which are the baked potato, that'll go into circulation. Then we store some of it in our liver and our muscle, and the rest of it we pack away as fat. So any energy we don't use immediately, which is the majority of it, we pack away as fat. The challenge then becomes if that energy surplus is so high that fat is accumulating and accumulating. Where that fat originally came from are either excess calories or excess carbohydrates. Because your body isn't just getting rid of it. You know, I use the example of like a dollar bill of some sort. Like if you have extra money, you save it. You're not throwing it away, you're not burning it, you're not losing it. Hopefully, you're going to save it. Well, your body does the same thing. It wants to preserve energy. It doesn't ever want to have a situation where you're gonna be low in energy. The reason why we store things as fat is because that's our largest energy depot. So in general, fat has a very valuable, strong component to our health. The challenge is where we are overabundant on that fat storage and we're not utilizing it as efficiently or as much as we should be. So that's where physical activity comes in, that's where other nutrient availability comes in, and that's where the organs are now starting to compete against who gets what, at what points, and how efficient are they at using them. So going back to the example of what happens to fat for the heart will keep using fat for its own energy purpose, but now there's a lot more energy running through the system itself. And so the structure of the heart starts to have challenges. And that's the major issue. But whether we're doing high carb or low carb or high protein or fasting, whatever it may be, the heart is using fat for energy. That's what it's using. I mean, that's what it's made for. And it makes sense because for cardiovascular activity where you're increasing the heart capacity and you're increasing all of the heart functions, it's a fat base, it's aerobic exercise, it's fat based. So sometimes that helps people categorize it too. Okay, I know I use that. In aerobic exercise, even when you're resting, it's the same thing.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about exercise. I want to get into nutritional ketosis, the key areas that we need to focus on and be aware of, and we've spoken a lot about that. But one thing that I think is really important for people to hear is when we are choosing to become fat adapted, what we do with exercise and movement. And just to give a little bit of a background here. So when I, 2 years ago, started to go into nutritional ketosis, I had a very cardiovascular heavy program that I was doing. And I found as I was starting to adapt, I literally couldn't do my runs. I didn't have the capacity to do it. And so over that period of maybe the first time that I went into nutritional ketosis, maybe it took me like 6 or 8 weeks. It took me longer. But once I was there, I was not exercising. And because I felt so good, like I never had so much clarity, my body felt good, I looked great, all of these things were happening, I thought, well, maybe I don't need to exercise as much. And so I stopped exercising. And over the course of the next year, what happened is my body composition started to change ever so slightly. And I wasn't necessarily consuming the most effective fats, right? And we'll talk about that as well. So as my lean muscle mass started to decline very, very slowly, my composition changed. So can you tell us a little bit about what we should be doing from an exercise perspective while we're becoming adapted to using fat as our primary fuel source instead of glucose, and once we are fat adapted, what kind of exercises are the best?
Good question. I love this one. And I bring it back to so many people basically fall back on that. Should I exercise or should I diet? And I guess I'll do this where I do them together for a little bit, but usually an individual lean on one or the other. And they are not mutually exclusive. They're basically two amazing routes to the same location of health. So you need both. And when it comes to exercising on keto, then it gets very complicated because you need both, but the transition period is a major one for the body. So I also want, when I start working with someone, I just let them know you're asking your body to completely change its entire metabolic system. So be kind to it, listen to it. If something feels off, it probably is. Trust the intuition. And also understanding, just as you said, like there's a new sense to yourself when you're fat adapted. If you're somebody who's really locked in and it works for you and you click into it, you feel different. So often people will say, I used to get some of these feelings from exercise and now I'm getting them from food, so I feel great. And it's just such a major issue because exercise isn't just about the body composition. It's not just about energy. There's just so many valuable pieces to it. And a big part of it when you're going low carb is that because the energy in your system is starting to distribute slightly differently and your body is starting to rely on different sources of energy. So when I say that, I mean that typically your muscle is very glycogen dependent if you're a higher carb individual. So for exercise, this goes back to classic exercise nutrition, that you consume something that's carb filled either before or during exercise. And the point of that is that carbs release very quick energy. So you eat it, you feel great, and then you're able to use some of the internal energy you have, but it's a combination. When you're fat adapted, the whole goal is that you have a heavier reliance on your own internal stores and you use food as an energy and caloric. You just are turning to food in a slightly different mentality. So for exercise, when all of a sudden you don't have that quick burst of energy that you used to from those quick carbohydrates or those simple carbohydrates, you might feel like you're dragging, you'll feel really heavy, your legs feel heavy, you feel slow.
Exactly.
Sometimes the electrolyte balance is off, and so people will feel their heart race. A lot of runners will report that their heart rate is much higher at similar zones. So if it's somebody who's zone training, that's alarming, you know yourself. So there's all of these very unusual, quirky things that start to happen. And a lot of the challenges I see are when people go ahead and fat adapt and then switch their exercise to the same level that they were before.
So while they're fat adapting, should they exercise or not?
You should exercise, but you should be kind and start slower. So when it comes to the diet, go ahead and switch as quickly as and efficiently and as well prepared as you feel ready.
Right.
But for your exercise, start slow so that you can test it, because it's still very valuable. It's going to do above and beyond and just different things than the nutrition will. And the really cool part of it is that research shows, and this research we have in women, is that exercise with a ketogenic diet was able to preserve lean muscle mass and decrease body fat more than any other. So the other styles tested in that particular study were just a ketogenic diet, a high carb diet with resistance training, or a ketogenic diet with resistance training. And the ketogenic diet with resistance training was the only one where they maintained, or some women even increased muscle mass, and they decreased specifically body fat.
Dr. Kathy Saenz, we did a study together for my book, High Fiber Keto, and I thought it would be great if you could just share a little bit about that study.
Yeah, so it's called the GLOW study, and it was focused on women and metabolic and mental health. So a very unique and collaborative project, and there's several researchers on it. So from Jacksonville University, so Heather Hassenblas is on it, Karina Winters is on it, just brilliant minds and professors. So what we were able to design was a research study that looked at the beginning stages of nutritional ketosis. So nutritional ketosis is just the process of your body producing higher levels of ketones while maintaining a healthy metabolic state. So it's very different and unique from ketoacidosis. It is completely different metabolic range, and it focuses on improving or at least restabilizing that metabolic health. So we looked at it the first couple weeks because there's a lot of research that looks into keto adaptation, which is the later stages of fat adaptation that takes several weeks into even several months. But we don't know how quickly these shifts occur in women. And those are some of the things we talked about. This has been studied, but to focus on women is very unique. And we focus on a lot of areas that plague women's health. So we looked at resting blood glucose levels, we looked at cholesterol panels, we looked at body composition, we looked at waist circumference and waist to hip, which is a hugely clinical marker that a woman could do on her own. We looked at blood pressure, and we looked at hand grip strength. So all of these physiological objective markers. But the amazing part of the study is that then we also got to the subjective markers, which we don't get to talk about nearly as much. And that's well out of my area, so it was a new world of exploring for myself, but Dr. Hassenblas that's her area of expertise. So the psychology and the psychological aspects of how this diet may be affecting you, because so many women do report, mentally I feel different. Often it's reported as a positive sense, but we don't have any data to get to learn more about it. So in this study, we were able to do a series of validated self-reports, both before and after a large chunk, and then every single day we asked women how they were feeling as they were transitioning into a well-formulated ketogenic diet. So the study design was middle-aged women that had no other health contraindications, that were just interested in changing their diet. There were some women that did have metabolic disadvantages, but nobody that had been diagnosed or was any sort of red zone, basically. For all intents and purposes, they were women that were looking to improve health. So we looked at them metabolically over the course of 3 weeks, or about 21 days, and we did what's called a free living study. So it meant that we educated them on how to change their diet, but really they took it upon themselves to personalize it for each woman. And then we had registered dietitians, so we very closely worked with the women to make sure that it was adequate calories. So we didn't change calories for the women, we wanted them to stay the same, and that all of the essential nutrients were included. So we weren't sacrificing any of their nutritional health throughout the process. And then how they felt was those were the outcomes of the study. So we followed these women for 3 weeks. We had 2 groups that completed. We had about 20 to 25 women complete the study, and these unbelievable and very unique results, some that require more exploration, that were unique to this particular study, and then there were several markers that changed that were very reflective to work we've seen in the literature previously. So that's excellent from 2 sides. One, it validates that the diet was consistent with other work that's been done in the literature, but also that there are unique things that are happening in women that we need to learn more about. And maybe it's the case that it was only 3 weeks. Maybe we need a longer time to be able to see that whole picture. Maybe it's something we should really let women know about. Hey, you'll see these positive sides, but there are these other shifts as well. The most probable response to it is that we just hit the tip of the iceberg, and so much more needs to be explored. But it was incredible. It's my first study.
With incredible results.
Oh my gosh,
too.
incredible!
One woman lost, I think the highest fat loss was like 10 pounds in those 3 weeks, and 7 pounds of weight loss, and changes in the circumference of their waist. I mean, everybody had an impact on their
Right.
blood glucose levels.
Blood glucose levels for about 70% of them all came right into range, but just about everybody lowered blood glucose. So at least we saw
Incredible.
shifts.
Yeah.
And the one we haven't talked about as much, but blood pressure. Blood pressure normalized in every, I want to have the data in front of me so I don't get it incorrect, but in such a large number, and I hesitate to say every one of them, but I think all of them normalized. But that includes the women that had lower blood pressure. They came up, but to a level that you want to see stronger vasculature. But that happened within, half a moon cycle. So it's just so incredible to see women that, it was also my first study working with just women, and it was humbling and it was fun, and they asked so many questions. So bottom line is we had participants that were not only interested in allowing, in learning the science process, but they cared. I mean, they called me at all hours of the night for food advice.
And you answered the calls.
And it was so great.
We need to really focus on how we can take the steps to catch up so that we can start to understand our bodies better and understand the different life cycles that we go through, the different stages. So it's such an honor and a blessing to be able to have the opportunity to have you and your colleagues do the kind of research that you're doing.
It was incredible to work with them. I couldn't stand to work with our whole team. Yes, to have the opportunity to study women. And if anything, the hardest part about the study was that so many wanted to keep going past that time, or they wanted to include exercise, or there were several women that were excluded for the research purpose. But meaning we were screening over 100 women.
Oh, I know. It was unbelievable how many people wanted to be part of it. Let's talk a little bit about who is the ketogenic lifestyle for. And it makes me think about the great book that you had me read early on in our relationship, The Art and Science of Low Carb Living, Dr. Volek. And the amount of people, for example, in this country, the 75% of people that they reference that are carb intolerant. So tell us a little bit about your thought process on who should try nutritional ketosis and why.
Anybody that has any sort of metabolic dysregulation or history of it should consider at least a lower carb diet, at least a lower or reduced sugar diet. That's probably true across the board for most individuals.
Right.
Those that fall into keto, I'll say a non-clinical answer, and honestly those that want to, because you just can't force someone into it. It may make a lot of sense in a textbook, and it makes a lot of sense in your own space, but the second you are at a family party or you're traveling or there's a holiday, anything cultural, unless you really want to do it or you find that it works for you, it can be challenging to sustain. So I encourage anybody who's curious, anybody who wants to try it, anybody to at least learn about it, talk to those who have, see if it's right for you to try, and then yes, find the right information to try it, but try it. And then beyond that, in a clinical sense, anyone that has a metabolic challenge, anybody that has trouble maintaining muscle mass and is older population, anybody that has a high risk of cancer, anybody that has a high risk of different neurological disorders, at least explore it. At least explore it.
I learned about nutritional ketosis many years ago from Dr. Joseph Maroon, first and foremost, as it related to different people that I had in my life. Someone who was dealing with cancer, we put him on the ketogenic diet. He had stomach cancer. And then also my son who was suffering from seizures. And so I was able to see the transformation in both of these individuals. And so for me, having autoimmune disorders, being able to reduce the systemic inflammatory response within my body has been a complete and total game changer. And so it's so easy to hear what you're saying about going to these different events and seeing this food and not having the desire to eat it because of all of the benefits that I personally get to experience with my own health and with my own body. And We could have my 7-year-old sitting next to me right now, Christian, and he would say the same thing. Like, he doesn't know what the ketogenic diet is, but he's going to tell you that olives and sardines and all the good fats make him feel good. And those are the foods that he goes for. So it's an incredible thing. What are the top 5 things that we need to be thinking about if we want to get into nutritional ketosis?
Oh yes, great question. So we'll review them, and the top 5 would be, only top 5? Okay. So they will be education, hydration and sodium balance, sources of dietary fat, how to manage protein, and then high quality carbohydrate sources. So the number one thing, and it's not the popular response, but the number one thing that I suggest everyone consider is education. First and foremost, it is a completely different approach than you might have been doing. It might be against or outside of some of the cultural or social norms in your circle. And I continue to say culture because, for example, rice is such a major part of my family. And my dad, who from the outside looks so incredibly healthy, actually has a couple of things that he's working through, and he's a perfect candidate for nutritional ketosis. And he repeats to me that he will do a ketogenic diet anytime as long as he can still eat rice. And so the social parts of us, and also understanding why you are changing the diet the way you are, so that when you're approached with really tough decisions at the airport or at a gas station or at the grocery store, you feel equipped to be able to handle that decision making. Because I can hand anybody and you can Google it, you can look online for a menu. Anyone has that. But the reasons why you're constructing the way you are is so vitally important. So I recommend that everybody gets some form of education and power behind it.
So you recommend that everybody get some education. I'm hoping that we can put into the resources here some of the education that you have out there that you've really developed as it relates to understanding how fat can be a primary source of fuel and the benefits that we can achieve. I mean, I know there have been moments in the past 2 years where I've called you up and said, Dr. Kathy, I'm eating too many nuts. And while I know these monosaturated fats are really good for me, what am I doing wrong? And you would say, oh, we actually need to raise your ratio of saturated fat because of XYZ. Or there could be a million other questions. And not everybody has the unbelievable privilege and access that I have to be able to pick up the phone and ask these questions, but everybody's wondering, why am I not dropping as much weight as I was? Why have I stalled? Maybe why, there are so many different little things that go on. So from an educational standpoint, it's a constant process of allowing ourselves to continue to get educated. And hopefully, this interview is going to help a lot of people really learn the things that they need to know. So I just wanted to really frame out the education. Okay, so what's the next one?
Hydration levels. So one of the first things you notice when independent of increasing fat, just decreasing carbohydrate, which is what the primary step is when you're following a well-formulated ketogenic diet, is that water balance is now very, very unique and different. So there's 3 main reasons for that. One, carbohydrates store a large amount of water. So 20% of our fluid intake or our ability to ingest sodium and water comes from carb sources, so breads. So if you're somebody who is coming from a diet where maybe you had oatmeal in the morning or cereal in the morning, even a piece of toast. So if you're somebody that had a starch in the afternoon, then that now is completely out of your diet, meaning that 20% of your sodium, as well as the fluid that was coming with it, have now drastically changed. So if we consider that for our own body, that's a huge amount. That's almost a quarter.
Yeah.
So the second reason that fluid is so important, and when I mention hydration, I mean fluid and electrolytes. So the second reason why it's so important is as your body is breaking through its own glycogen stores, which it does the first couple weeks, it's also releasing water. So you're excreting, so basically people are peeing a large amount in the beginning. And if you continue to see it very, very clear, it means that you're losing a lot more fluids and your sodium balance and your electrolyte balance are now off. However, The first couple days, it's also very motivating. And some individuals are frustratingly not losing weight in those first couple days, and others will drop. I've seen upwards of 5, 10. I even saw one individual at 14 pounds in the first week.
Yeah.
So excited, so happy. I see that as, okay, we need to go back to diet construction, because that means it's not coming from the places you want it to come from. And the sources that it is coming from, which is water or electrolyte balance, are leading to a lot of uncomfortable or potentially dangerous symptoms and side effects.
Talk about some of the symptoms of a lack of hydration or a lack of electrolytes.
So when fluid or electrolyte balance is incorrect in the body will react in some obvious and not obvious ways. So some of the more common things that people will report will be headaches, heart palpitations, they feel very weak, they feel faint. Another response, which is not always or cramping is also very popular. Cramping's a big one. Something that's not as intuitive is your GI system. It is completely changed. So if you're feeling constipated or you're having a lot of issues in the bathroom in general, if anything is shifting, often people will say, oh, I no longer have my fiber intake. When in reality, those first few days, it may be a much bigger result to your hydration status, so either fluid or electrolyte balance.
Yeah, I take, like this morning, I was here at 6 a.m., so I got up at 5. I took my electrolytes. I took 2 scoops actually in my collagen shake this morning. I have to do that every day. If I don't take my electrolytes, I'm always using a pinch of salt, and sometimes I'll do both. And it sounds counterintuitive in a lot of ways, and I never had to take high levels of electrolytes before I went keto. But if I don't do it on a daily basis, and even though I'm so adapted at this point, I still will notice it.
Oh, absolutely. And sodium has a very complicated history with us in nutrition. But it is so vitally important, because it's not that you're consuming a high sodium diet, it's that you are replenishing. That's how much you're losing, or you're no longer intaking. The one caveat with it, which I do warn people, and this is fairly new research in the past 2 to 3 years, is that very novel research showed if you're an individual who is on a sodium restricted diet due to medication, or you're under a medical provider, then absolutely heed the advice first, but make sure they're aware of the fact that you're changing your dietary lifestyle, because that's how large of an impact it'll have, even on your medications. So make sure that you're with a medical provider, that you feel comfortable having that conversation, and they feel comfortable either providing advice or knowing when to look out for another expert to help, because that type of balance can be incredibly dangerous if not taken serious.
Yeah, very good point. So what's the next one on your list?
So hydration was one of we transition into it. We'll go right into sodium itself, because the hydration balance includes fluids and all of our electrolytes, but there's something very special about sodium, and we lose a large amount of it on a ketogenic diet because of those initial reasons mentioned, but replenishing it is a whole nother story. So we replenish fluids and we can replenish electrolytes, but you do have to supplement, just as you mentioned, above and beyond. And I hear so often individuals say, well, I've added so much more salt to my food. And unfortunately, even if it feels like a lot in the food, it's almost always has to be supplemented, except for that asterisk that we had put previously. But otherwise, you're supplementing. If you haven't been told to restrict, it needs to come in a different form.
And you're supplementing, how would you recommend to supplement?
You've got so many options that you've mentioned for individuals. And the ones that I use commercially or quickly are just a bouillon cube, or I'm a soup person. So make a quick broth, and you can either make it yourself from a natural stock or a bouillon cube.
I find that I try to have bone broth every single day. There's so many benefits, but to your point, the sodium, the amount of electrolytes, the amount of sodium that you get in just 1 cup is really noticeable.
Oh yes, and needed. Honestly, it's needed at that point, because it's not that you are, again, individuals will look at it as a high sodium diet, but you're really just replenishing, otherwise you are too low. And some of the other symptoms that an individual may feel, terrible sleep, your mood is off, you're having difficulty concentrating, you're cranky, and you just feel out of it. And that's what people will report the first couple days. Like, something feels off, and trust that intuition that there might be something off in the diet construction. Almost always I can turn to salt or some sort of fluid balance and we can take care of it.
So fascinating. I know when I went into nutritional ketosis, I found that I was obsessed with eating these little seaweed snacks. I eat them every day. My kids love to eat them too. And when I don't get them, I notice like, oh, I'm not getting enough of my minerals. I can feel it. And then, you know, from taking Epsom salt baths to using magnesium in a lot of different ways, there's just such an increase in the need for our minerals and electrolytes, and really understanding how to use them in our diets.
Absolutely. It's understanding how to incorporate them, and that's where the education piece comes in, identifying when you may be low or when something is off, so that you can identify which one to use, because sometimes it's sodium, sometimes it's water, sometimes it's magnesium, sometimes it's potassium. Each one's slightly different. Sodium is the biggest culprit. We start there and then kind of look elsewhere from that moment. But yeah, I tell individuals, trust if it feels off. It may very well be. And that's where the exercise component comes in as well. So when you're first transitioning, because of the fluid balance, some people are going to handle their exercise just fine from a muscle standpoint. Like, you will feel good to work out, but sometimes it's actually the fluid balance that affects your heart rate, and that affects the sweat rate and your focus and strength throughout the workout. So that is the primary reason why I tell people to take it slow and basically get to know this new you.
So cool. And it is a whole new you. So what else should we be paying attention to?
Sources of fat. So not all fat sources are created equal, and most of what we consider healthy fats, which I think one of my next big goal is to remove this idea that there's a healthy fat. There are unhealthy fats. They're primarily processed, or they're processed trans fats. Other than that, the fat itself, if it's coming naturally, may be a perfectly great source of fat. We just need to figure out which source of fat is appropriate for the type of diet that you're leading. But to call them unhealthy or healthy fats, it just puts this umbrella term primarily over saturated fats, which is undoubtedly our shining star in a ketogenic diet, but an uncomfortable shining star because there is so much negative research around it. Rightfully so. The negative research was always done in a mixed diet setting. So if you've got two competing energy sources, then there's going to be an energy source that the body just isn't going to turn to as much and is going to save in high levels for later, and that's saturated fat. Once we remove those competing energy sources, so in this situation, anything that's going to be a high glucose or a carbohydrate-rich food, once we reduce those and the body is turning to fat for fuel, it prefers saturated fat for energy. It's so easy to metabolize, it's so easy to break apart, it oxidizes quickly. And there is such powerful research that shows increases of saturated fat in the diet are not increases of a faulty fat metabolism internally in the body. So basically, what type of fat you eat doesn't always equal all the types of fat in circulation.
Interesting.
And it's the same concept with cholesterol. So dietary cholesterol does not equal circulating levels of cholesterol. And this has been shown in so many really great studies. But we can have a very cholesterol-rich meal and our cholesterol levels may or may not bump, because most of fat metabolism is occurring internally, cholesterol being included in that. So that fourth major note of understanding what types of fat to eat and how to construct your plate, that's 70% of the battle, which makes sense because it's 70% of your diet, but that's the majority of the battle. Once you figure out what sources of fat to eat and how to portion them for you, the rest of it kind of falls into place. So minerals, hydration, and fat, and then we just fill in the rest.
I love it. What else should we be thinking about?
The last thing that I tell individuals to consider towards the end is, well, there's two things. One, high quality sources of protein for themselves, but it's still a moderate protein diet. So it's very comfortable to turn to that for your high fat sources, but it's still going to be the same amount that you need. And often it stays on the moderate to a little bit lower than moderate for an individual, depending on where they are, but still within healthy ranges. And then the last piece of that is making sure that your carbohydrate sources are coming from rich, nutrient-dense foods. So it's not a carbohydrate erased diet. You are still able to explore and enjoy so many delicious carb-rich foods, but they're in the form of fruits and vegetables. So they come in all these really great whole food sources that are going to get all those micronutrients that are so valuable for our health.
When you're talking about this fat to protein ratio, and a lot of the meats and the cheeses and different sources of where we get our fat have the protein with them, what is your specific concern there, that we're going to consume too much protein that will transform into glucose?
Yes, so all of protein is comprised of about 21 amino acids. Those amino acids have all sorts of different properties, and there's a subset of amino acids that their properties do induce a glucogenic response. So what that means is they can stimulate insulin on their own, and they can stimulate glucose on their own. And that's a very important process in our body, because if we're ever low in carbohydrate, our body has all these backup systems to create glucose, which is needed for the brain and for red blood cells. So there's a reason why that happens. Now, in a ketogenic diet, because protein is so comfortable to eat for us, I mean, it's our first place to turn to, because fat is just weird. You don't naturally go to it. So the reason why you turn to protein and why it all of a sudden over abuses that particular cycle is because we are trying to maintain steady glucose and insulin levels. So if we're over consuming protein, those systems kick in, but we're not trying to induce them. But the body doesn't know that. You're ingesting a large amount of protein, and it's going to trigger a certain response that you're actually trying to minimize and control.
Right.
So you're essentially doing the opposite of what you want. And it gets really frustrating because you work so hard to reduce carbohydrate, but then all of a sudden you're in the same boat because you increase the wrong nutrient. So we're not suppressing protein by any means. You just need to find the level that works with you, that's going to maintain your muscle mass, but not trigger. So it's a very delicate balance, and the rest of it you fill in with fat.
Yeah, and you make a great point there. You know, it feels odd and sometimes like even embarrassing, you know, if you're taking a scoop of butter other people are eating different foods at the table, and you're eating butter by the scoopful, or you're taking a tablespoon of oils, you know, like there's a lot of ways to sort of mask consuming the higher levels of oil. I like to use MCTs with my salad dressing and really utilize my salad as a source of getting my good fats. I mean, there's lots of ways to do it. But to your point, it's something that we can so easily derail and then just not fully understand, like, why am I not in nutritional ketosis? My carbs are where they need to be. And it's because of the protein consumption.
Exactly right. And it also feels very satisfying to see a plate that's full.
Yeah.
And you're able to then consume it. And I think we've talked about this before, that I know what a plate of a mixed meal looks like. I know how much I'll eat. So if I've got like a chicken noodle soup, or if I have like a salad and a starch and some sort of a protein, I know how much to serve myself at a buffet line because I've been doing it since I was born.
Yeah.
But when it comes to a ketogenic diet, now your portions shift because the macronutrient content is different and the calorie content is different. So things look a lot smaller, and they are really messing with someone's satiety when they're looking at a plate that doesn't look like it's enough food. I don't even know if it's gonna fill me up. And a perfect example of this is when we did this study called the meal study. It's a published article, it's fantastic. And it was back at the University of Connecticut, and what we did is we looked at 8 different diets, and we titrated it for each individual going through the study. So it started at a very low carbohydrate ketogenic diet, very high fat, and every 3 to 4 weeks we decreased carbs, increased fat proportionally. So by the end of it, they were following a traditional recommended diet by American Heart Association, about 300 grams of carbohydrate, which is not a soup, it's a moderate carb diet, but even that felt so different from our 30 grams that we started with. But when we had the low carb diets, we prepared all the meals ourselves for these particular research studies. And when we had the low carb diets, it was such a small amount of food. We could package it in just a few containers. For the high carb diets, we would need multiple bags. And it's the exact same amount of calories in those meals. It's just the content is so different. So the foods are so different. So the volume is different. And we would have participants report back. Now that wasn't part of the study, but they, you know, you have a great rapport with your participants, and they would tell us, like, it is really crazy to see this amount of food after we were low carb for so long, because it's a point that we don't talk as much in the clinical side, but it's very practical.
And being in nutritional ketosis every day, there's so many incredible adjustments that we have to make, so many different tweaks and different ways of approaching life. It is like entering a whole new universe. But I think, you know, what you've shared with us today, you and I could go on for the next 15 hours, and I'm sure that we will continue this conversation in many ways. And I think, you know, we're going to add a bunch of resources from the work that you've done. And I just can't thank you enough for leading us and helping us to understand, as women, our health, what a preferred source of fuel can look like, and really how to manage a lot of the different challenges that come along the way.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited to keep talking.
Thank you, Dr. Kathy.
Dr. Ara Jill, so lovely to have you here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
You are a professor at the University of Florida. Tell me a little bit about your background and your area of research.
I have really interesting backgrounds. First, I actually studied economics and exercise science in undergrad, and then I ended up studying health services research, management, and policy in my PhD. So now I'm working in the same department, health services research, at University of Florida.
And you have extensive experience on the topic of body composition. I want to talk about this because I love this topic. Tell me why, especially as women, we should be focused more on overall body composition.
I've heard a lot of ironic situations, obesity paradox around people, and especially I love sports, and then I observed some athletes of their body compositions and their performance, physical function, status, and then I found out that actually professional athletes are healthier than the general people. It's pretty obvious. However, most of those athletes are overweight or obese. So how can you say they're healthy or they're unhealthy? So my question started from that point that, okay, we actually need to focus more on body composition instead of body weight. So I started to investigate the role of body compositions instead of body weight. And then simply speaking, body fat is the major cause of overweight or obese, and that results in a lot of diseases like chronic diseases. However, people are trying to lose just body weight instead of body fat. So I wanted to actually study how to maintain healthy body composition and healthy lifestyle without obsessing to the body weight.
That's really interesting to me because as a dietitian, I see a lot of obsession with BMI.
Correct.
And it sounds like from what you were just saying, you would see people that were falling under that category of overweight or obese according to their BMI.
Right,
When in
exactly.
actuality, they have wonderful body composition athletes. Very
Civil
fit people.
forces, yes, of course. So they probably have more muscle, and then we know muscle weighs than fat. So we really can't say they are overweight and they have unhealthy body composition. They might have more muscle, which means healthier body composition. So I think we need to think about this healthiest body composition.
How can someone improve their body composition?
We can start from understanding what kinds of body composition actually exist. So simply speaking, there are body fat, muscle, bone mass, and body water. So improvement of body composition means you want to lose your fat, or you want to increase your muscle, or you want to maintain your bone mass. We have to think about those questions first. Usually when we say the healthy body composition means we have lower body fat and higher muscle mass, and probably maintain bone mass, but it can't be possible. And then we actually have to be hydrated regularly. So there is a cut points of body fat and muscle mass, but it's not standardized universally. So many researchers, and including me, actually pick up the random numbers arbitrarily, and then we actually tested those numbers, actually evaluated the disease risk or mortality risk. So there's no standardized cut points. However, I can say the body fat mass for men, it could be between 20 to 25%. And for women is 30 to 35%. Usually women has more body fat over men. So 30 to 35% could be optimal for women. So women usually need to use body fat to maintain their body temperature and then maintain their metabolism. So fat is actually important for women.
Do you see the BMI as a measurement kind of becoming antiquated?
It takes longer to replace this BMI because still BMI is the strongest measurement for this body weight for obesity measure because it's easy. And you just need a scale to stand on it. But many people are aware of this caveat of BMI.
Dr. Joe, we hear the term skinny fat. Can you explain to us what skinny fat means and why we should be concerned about being skinny fat?
I'm not sure how many people are familiar to this term skinny fat, but in the research area, we usually call normal weight obesity population, meaning an individual who have normal weight based upon BMI, but who have excessive body fat invisibly. So when we measure their body fat, they actually have higher body fat mass than the 30 to 35% cut point or 20 to 25% for men. That case, actually, they look normal, they look just okay, and then I don't want to generalize to all these normal weight people, but some people think that, oh, I'm fit, so I don't need to exercise that regularly, or I don't need to actually control my diet for my health. But I actually did research about this normal weight obesity population, and 33% of this normal weight obesity population have pre-diabetes. And also, according to the clinical guideline from the U.S. Preventive Service Task Force, they actually target adults aged between 40 and 70 who are overweight and obese. They can actually receive screening of diabetes regularly. However, these normal weight people are neglected from this guideline and they never have a chance to get screening. But 33% of normal weight people actually have prediabetes. Wow. And then they actually are exposed to high risk of developing type 2 diabetes in like 1 or 2 years. So these people are actually at risk of developing other types of chronic diseases in short time period, but they can recognize they have excessive body fat and then they're at risk.
Have you seen a correlation between that group of people and whether they fall into an apple or a pear shape?
It's interesting because normal weight population look just normal fit. Mm-hmm. They don't have a specific body shape of like pear or apple type because those people usually have visceral fat. So they don't have really high subcutaneous fat. That's why they can recognize they have actually more body fat compared to the other people. But central obesity, like more fat around the abdominal, is very issue, especially for middle-aged women because of the hormone change. And then after 45 years, middle-aged women actually struggling with this weight gain, especially the more fat accumulated around their waist.
So it's that kind of pre-menopausal or just about entering menopause.
Correct.
When we might be seeing more of this belly fat accumulation around the waist.
Yes, but it's really hard to actually observe this type of body shape to normal weight people because they're just normal range of body weight. Yes.
How can women combat extra weight in the midsection?
For this skinny fat population, they actually need to pay more attention on their body fat or muscle. So just do exercise regularly and then lift some weights. So I always emphasize on the need of this resistance training because most people like jogging or running or doing just aerobic exercise, but they definitely need resistance exercise. I recently read some articles about this resistance band exercise for this menopausal woman. It really helps to actually build up more muscle and they lose their body fat. So at least using this resistance bands or lifting some weight, that really helps to actually build more muscle and they lose their body fat. And also for this middle-aged women who are close to the menopausal stage, they need to do more exercise, aerobic exercise, of course, but I highly recommend them to do this resistance training also because not many women actually do the resistance training recently. It's really hard, it takes time, and then it's not fun actually. But it's really helpful to actually have more muscle their core and then prevent those chronic diseases as well as actually improve their physical function. So a lot of middle-aged women are suffering from this osteoporosis or arthritis, but muscle actually helps to protect these bone mass loss and then the loss of their body physical function. So resistance training is definitely necessary.
I love the idea of the resistance bands. How important is it for you to give your arms and your legs equal attention?
I actually appreciate you pointed out that the importance of this leg muscle because leg muscle is the largest muscle group over the body, and then the leg muscle actually helps to burn more fat over the body. So if you have more muscle on your leg, that definitely helps to lose your fat and then burn more fat and then keep healthy body compositions.
How should we seek out the proper facilities or the proper people to give us an accurate body composition reading?
So the most accurate equipment for measuring body composition is actually DEXA scan. So it's MRI scan. It's really expensive to just measure your body composition. Or you can also use the body bioelectrical impedance, BIA, we usually called. But it also charges it charges high cost for just measuring body composition. And recently there are some attempts to use ultrasound to measure body composition as well, but it's not the standard of care. So you just go to see a doctor, hey, I want to use ultrasound to measure my body composition. It won't work that way. And also there are a lot of electrical scale out there, and then they actually shows you the body compositions, your body weight, but those are not actually validated by the government or the very public agents. So you should be careful to read all of those numbers from the digital scales. However, there is a really long time used equipment out there, which is skin fold caliper. So you can go to the gym or ask to the physician or nurses, can you measure my body composition or my at least body fat mass using this, it looks like this skin fold caliper, and then it can tell you where you have more fat or you have more muscle.
Dr. Joe, you are in such a unique area. I would love to learn more about your research.
So talking back to the skinny fat population, I actually looked at these normal weight people, how many people are actually misclassified as normal. So based upon their BMI, they are considered as normal people. So probably the physicians say, oh, you're normal. You don't need to get screening or you don't need to lose your weight because you're just normal. But I found that 64% of this normal weight population are actually having excessive body fat.
64% of the population is estimated to be skinny fat. That is just unbelievable to me. What does that mean for their health?
So it is very important to notify and measure their body composition for this 64% because I mentioned earlier, they never can receive this health screening because they have normal weight, but they have unhealthy body composition. So they are actually at risk of type 2 diabetes, highly likely compared to the just normal and normal fat body composition population. So we need to pay more attention to these normal weight people, and then I wish they can be included this type of clinical guideline no matter what they actually body weight is, and then they actually can have benefit to get screened by a physician and then regularly check their body composition, physical function, the risk of diseases in the future.
A lot of women probably don't really care too much if they fall into that skinny fat category. Again, as long as their clothes fit okay, as long as they feel like they look good, as long as they look good in a bikini. What would you say to the women who are technically skinny fat, but they like the way they look?
Well, that's actually an important question because it's true, a lot of normal weight people don't really care about their visceral fat or their risk of diseases, but they probably don't want to have chronic diseases for their life. Like they need to take medication regularly because of their high blood pressure or glucose level. And they also don't want to go to see a doctor very often. So even though you guys, that person has skinny shape, but if that person definitely has a risk of developing this diabetes or high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and those actually complicated and complex chronic diseases will result in cardiovascular disease, which means they have higher mortality rate. So it's fine you can have a skinny shape, but you want to live healthy without diseases.
You're not necessarily saying if someone is at a healthy weight for their height, that they necessarily need to lose more weight. They just need to focus on shifting their body composition from, a higher fat percentage to more muscle mass.
If someone is obsessed with body weight or they really want to lose your fat, they change their diet immediately. But if they're normal weight, they don't really care about their diet because they're just normal. But it's really a huge effect in the future. So even your normal weight, you have to listen to your body first.
Pre-diabetes, diabetes, there's oftentimes when someone could be at a normal body weight for their height, and they might still have pre-diabetes or be at risk for diabetes or high cholesterol, high blood pressure.
Right, I actually have a similar story from my friend who, couple of friends are actually, they're very fit. They look just normal and they have good body composition. But one day, one of my friends got diabetes without any notification, or even that my friend never had a history of diabetes in his family. But he was really curious why I got diabetes. Yeah. I worked out every day, I ate healthy every day, I don't know why. So actually that's, that cued me why these normal weight people actually have chronic diseases. They control their diet, they exercise every day, but why? Even though like football players, they might not have diabetes when they have overweight or obese status, but these normal people, so actually it's not really rare case normal people have diabetes or high blood pressure, especially someone who has history of family history of these chronic diseases, they are more at risk. So that's why we need to more focus on this body composition.
The major take-home message here is to really focus on body composition versus just your weight, despite if you're at a healthy weight or not.
So muscle is important.
Yes. Dr. Jo, thank you so much for stopping by today. This was so great chatting with you. I've learned so much, and I look forward to seeing your research in the future.
Thank you so much.
Naomi, it is so powerful to think about the research that the experts shared. By shifting your mindset from the number on the scale to your body composition and the percentage of muscle mass to body fat, you can have a tremendous impact on so many components of your well-being.
Just by learning about our metabolism, the biology of body composition, our different fueling systems, we can change the way our bodies look, and more importantly, the way we feel, the way we stay energized and youthful. We have 8 more episodes coming, and we are so glad to have you on this journey with us. If you know someone who is dealing with metabolism, hormone, weight, or self-esteem issues because they just don't feel good, this is an opportunity to help them to transform their lives, just like you're doing for yourself.
Click below to share, and thank you so much for joining us on the journey to a better life.